My name is Thessaly Vaughan. I have worked in this bureau for 31 years. I have filed incident reports about combat, diplomatic crises, biological contamination events, and first contact failures. I have seen footage of alien species doing things that defied our understanding of physics. I have reviewed autopsies of creatures whose anatomy made our best medical students weep in confusion. I thought I had seen everything. Then the Kandros Station incident landed on my desk. I want to be very clear about something before you read what follows. This document is not a work of exaggeration. It is not propaganda produced by the human diplomatic corps, though they have certainly referenced it enough times in treaty negotiations to make you wonder. Every witness account in this file has been cross-verified. Every piece of medical data has been reviewed by a minimum of 3 independent xenobiological teams from 3 separate hegemony member worlds. What you are about to read happened. All of it. The human's name was Sergeant First Class Dorian Mace. He was 34 years old by human reckoning, which places him somewhere in the early middle portion of a human lifespan. They can live, under ideal conditions, to somewhere between 90 and 120 years. He was not extraordinary by human standards. He was not a super soldier, not a genetic experiment, not one of their special warfare operatives who train under conditions that make our military psychiatrists reach for sedatives just reading about them. He was, by all accounts, a moderately experienced infantry soldier who had been doing his job for 11 years. What Sergeant Mace did on Kandros Station, and what his body survived in the doing of it, changed how the Hegemony Medical Institute teaches xenobiology at every level. This is his story, or rather, it is the story of what he survived, told mostly through the eyes of the people who watched it happen and couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. I have compiled this document from 47 separate witness testimonies, 17 hours of station security footage, and one extremely long and surprisingly coherent field medical report filed by Dr. Yavara Souls, a physician who, by her own admission, went into that operating bay expecting to write a death certificate and came out changed forever. Read carefully, take notes if you need to. And remember, this is what one human soldier looks like when he simply refuses to stop. Part 1. The station at the edge of everything. Witness account, caretaker rank Leslie, Kandros Station Environmental Division. Transcript reference, WA001. Interview conducted, 14 days post-incident. I need to tell you about the station first, because you can't understand what happened there without understanding what kind of place Kandros was. Kandros Station sat at the gravitational intersection of 3 separate shipping lanes, right at the boundary edge of what the hegemony called the Outer Commerce Corridor. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't one of those gleaming central hub stations you see in the diplomatic broadcasts, all curved glass and gravity gardens and species-specific habitat wings with proper atmospheric controls. Kandros was a working station. A grinding, loud, always something breaking working station, where the recycled air tasted like engine coolant, and the lighting panels in sections 7 through 12 had been on the maintenance request list for 2 years without anyone doing anything about them. We had about 3,000 permanent residents, double that in transient population on any given cycle, traders, mercenaries, courier pilots, the occasional diplomatic escort, and a constant low-level presence of hegemony compliance forces doing inspection rounds of the cargo holds. The population breakdown was something like 40% Vethani, 25% Sorvian, 15% Dressy, and the remaining 20% a rotating mix of maybe 30 other species. Humans had only been coming through Kandros for about 4 years at the time of the incident. They were still new enough that most of the permanent staff hadn't gotten used to them. I worked environmental maintenance, air recycling, temperature regulation, atmospheric composition monitoring, and I can tell you that the first time I had to adjust the oxygen mix in the human quarters, I spent 20 minutes double-checking my calculations because I was convinced I had made an error. Humans breathe an oxygen concentration that most of our atmospheric engineers consider dangerously high. Not toxic high, but you know that feeling you get when you're standing near an open combustion vent and the air feels too sharp. That's what human standard atmosphere feels like to most of us. Anyway, Kandros had a hegemony garrison. Small one, about 40 soldiers, mostly Vethani and Sorvian, commanded by a dressy officer named Commander Vethhalara. The garrison's main job was customs enforcement, dispute mediation, and keeping the peace when traders got into arguments over cargo manifests. They weren't prepared for what happened. None of us were. The human contingent on Kandros at the time of the incident was small. There was a diplomatic liaison team, 3 people, civilian and a 4-person military escort. Standard arrangement for human diplomatic missions operating in hegemony space. The 4 soldiers rotated guard duties and generally kept to themselves. They were polite enough. A little strange. Humans are always a little strange, but not difficult. Sergeant Mace was one of the 4. I had seen him around the station a few times before the incident. Big by human standards, I later learned he was something like 1.9 meters tall, which puts him in the upper range even for his species. Quiet. He had one of those faces that looks like it's been through something without showing you exactly what. Not hostile, just settled. Like a piece of metal that has been heated and cooled enough times that it's found its final shape. I remember he used to stop by the maintenance bay sometimes when I was running my shift, not to bother me, just, he seemed to like watching things get fixed. He told me once, in that careful, slightly formal way humans speak when they're trying to make sure they're being understood across a language barrier, that he found it calming to watch broken things become unbroken. I thought that was an odd thing for a soldier to say. Later, after everything that happened, I thought I understood it a little better. The day of the incident started like every other day on Kandros. Which is to say it started badly, because every day on Kandros started badly. Witness account, Logistics Officer Preen Vaseth, Kandros Station Cargo Division. Transcript reference, WA002. Interview conducted, 14 days post-incident. The Korath showed up 3 days before the incident. I want to make sure that's in the record because I filed a concern report at the time and I don't want it to seem like nobody saw it coming. The problem was that what I saw coming wasn't what actually happened. I thought it was going to be a smuggling operation. Simple contraband, maybe some restricted biological material, the kind of thing we dealt with twice a month. I wasn't thinking paramilitary. The Korath are, you have to understand the context. The Korath sovereignty had been in a low-grade territorial dispute with the hegemony for about 6 years at that point. Nothing that had escalated to open warfare, but the kind of grinding political conflict that produces a constant background hum of incident and provocation. The Korath didn't like humans being given provisional hegemony membership status. They had made that very clear through about a dozen different diplomatic channels. Humans were too volatile, too aggressive, too biologically unpredictable. Those were the arguments. The Hegemony Council had disagreed. Humans had gotten their provisional status, and the Korath had filed formal objections and then gone quiet in a way that made the intelligence services nervous. So when a Korath trade vessel showed up at Kandros and requested extended docking clearance, I flagged it. Commander Halara reviewed my report, agreed it was worth watching, and assigned 2 of her soldiers to monitor the cargo offloading. What none of us had anticipated was that the trade vessel was a front. The Korath team that came off that ship, 16 of them, all wearing civilian documentation, were not traders. I found that out the same way everyone else did, when they opened fire in the central concourse on day 3. Security footage transcript, Kandros Station Central Concourse. Camera array, CC7 through CC14. Timestamp, 14:23:07 GST. Transcribed and annotated by Senior Archivist Thessaly Vaughan. CC 7, 1423-07. The central concourse is at medium to high occupancy. Approximately 340 individuals are visible across the main floor and the two upper walkway levels. Commercial stalls line the perimeter. A food vendor's steam obscures the northwest camera angle. CC 8, 1423-19. A group of individuals in civilian clothing, subsequently identified as Korath paramilitary operatives, begin moving from 4 separate entry points toward the center of the concourse. Their movement pattern is coordinated. They are not running. They are walking in a way that is designed not to trigger alarm. CC 9, 1423-44. First weapon discharge. The initial shot strikes a Vethani merchant who is standing near the central information kiosk. She goes down. Screaming begins. CC 10, 1423-46. General chaos. Crowd movement becomes erratic. Stall structures are knocked over. Several individuals are trampled in the initial surge. CC 11, 1423-52. The Korath operatives have formed a loose perimeter, cutting off the 3 main exit corridors. The 4th exit, the maintenance access corridor on the station's eastern face, appears to have been overlooked. It is partially obscured by debris from a collapsed equipment stall. CC 12, 1424-03. Human individual subsequently identified as Sergeant First Class Dorian Mace, United Earth Forces, enters the concourse from the upper northwestern walkway. He is wearing civilian station clothing. He is not visibly armed. He stops when he sees the situation below. CC 12, 1424-08. Sergeant Mace remains stationary for approximately 5 seconds. His expression from the camera angle available is difficult to read. He then moves. Witness account: Sorvian trader Kila Mondros. Transcript reference: WA003. Interview conducted 12 days post-incident. I was in the concourse when it started. I had a cargo dispute meeting with a dressy freight coordinator, completely routine. I had been on Kandros a dozen times before. I knew people there. When the shooting started, I was near the eastern wall and my first instinct was just down. Get down. Get behind something solid. I ended up behind an overturned cargo pallet with about 8 other people. A young Vethani woman who couldn't have been more than 20 cycles, 2 dressy families with children, a Sorvian courier I vaguely recognized, and this older hegemony compliance officer who had a head wound and was having trouble staying conscious. We could see most of the concourse from where we were hiding. The Korath had everyone who hadn't managed to find cover out in the open, pushed toward the center of the floor. They were shouting things. I speak enough Korath to get the general idea, and what I was hearing was that they wanted the human diplomatic team. Name them, bring them forward, or they start shooting people until someone cooperates. The human diplomats were somewhere in the crowd. I didn't know which ones they were. I had never met them. But someone was going to point them out eventually, because that's what terror does. It finds the breaking point. Then I saw the human soldier. He had come down from the upper walkway somehow. I don't know when. I hadn't seen him come down. He was just suddenly at floor level, moving along the eastern wall, staying behind stalls and debris, moving quiet. Very quiet. He was a big man, but he moved like he'd been trained specifically to not take up space. He was bleeding. I didn't realize it at first because of his clothing. He was wearing a dark civilian jacket. But as he got closer to our position, I could see that his left arm was soaked through. He had a wound on his upper arm. He must have caught debris or a ricochet when the shooting started, because the Korath hadn't targeted him specifically yet. They didn't know he was there. He saw us behind the pallet. He stopped. We stared at each other. Then he put one finger to his lips. Humans do that. I had seen it before. It means silence. And he pointed toward the eastern maintenance corridor. He held up 3 fingers. Then he pointed at the Korath positions and shook his head slowly. I understood what he was telling us. He had counted the operatives near that exit. 3. Too many for a group of civilians to push past. He was telling us to wait. He went around the pallet to where the compliance officer was lying. He checked the wound clinical fast, no hesitation, and then he tore a strip from his own shirt and applied pressure. The compliance officer made a sound. The human put a hand on his shoulder and shook his head very gently. The universal sign for not now, stay quiet. He looked at the Vethani woman. She was shaking so hard her secondary limbs were rattling. He looked at her for a moment, not saying anything, and then he reached out and put his hand on top of hers. He didn't squeeze. He just placed it there, warm and steady, and held it for about 3 seconds. I don't know how to explain what that did. It didn't fix anything. The Korath were still there. People were still going to get hurt. But she stopped shaking. Not completely, but enough. And I felt something settle in my chest too, something that had been vibrating with panic since the first shot went off. Then the human stood up, looked at the Korath positions one more time, and moved away from us toward the south wall. I didn't understand what he was planning. I understood about 40 seconds later. Witness account, Dr. Yavara Souls, Hegemony Medical Institute, Kandros Station, Medical Bay. Transcript reference, WA007, Primary Medical Witness. Interview conducted, 8 days post-incident. I was in the medical bay when the alert came through. I was Kandros Station's senior physician at the time. We had 3 staff total, which was criminally understaffed for a station of that size. But that's a separate complaint I've filed separately and will continue to file until something changes. The medical bay was on the station's inner ring, about 400 meters from the central concourse. We could hear it, not the words but the sounds. The discharge of weapons, the crowd noise, the particular frequency of panic that travels through station walls and into your teeth. My staff and I prepared. We pulled out everything. Trauma kits, blood substitutes for the 4 most common species on the station, the specialized atmospheric units for dressy patients who go into shock because their respiratory system does something complicated that I won't try to explain here. We prepared for the worst and then we waited because there was nothing else we could do. The first casualties started arriving about 12 minutes after the shooting began. Mostly injuries from the initial crowd surge, trampling injuries, broken limbs, head wounds from falling equipment. Serious but manageable. We worked fast. Sergeant Mace was not among the first casualties. He arrived 47 minutes into the incident. And the reason I know the exact time is because I have never in my medical career experienced something that made me look at a clock in the precise way. I looked at that clock when he came through the door. He came through the door on his feet. That is the first thing I want the record to show. 47 minutes after the shooting started, after everything I am about to describe, Sergeant First Class Dorian Mace walked into my medical bay under his own power. His left arm had a through-and-through wound. The projectile had entered just below the shoulder, transited the deltoid and the upper portion of the tricep, and exited cleanly. In the intervening time, he had performed field dressing on it himself, using materials that, upon examination, appeared to be strips of his own clothing, a length of electrical cable he had apparently found somewhere, and what I later determined was a tube of industrial adhesive sealant from a maintenance kit. His right side had 2 fractured ribs. I discovered this when I ran the scanner and then had to run it again because I didn't believe the first result. When I told him, he nodded like I had told him something mildly inconvenient, like a scheduling conflict. He had a concussion, moderate, not severe, but present. When I asked him when that had happened, he thought about it and said he wasn't entirely sure, possibly when the wall came down. I will get back to the wall. He also had extensive soft tissue damage across his back. Both palms were lacerated from something I identified as grip friction on a metal surface. and he had what appeared to be a partial thickness burn on his right forearm that he had apparently not noticed until I pointed it out to him. That's not the part that made me scream. Part 2, What Happened in the Concourse. Compiled from security footage and 14 witness accounts. Compiled narrative, archivist Thessaly Vaughan. To understand what Sergeant Mace did in the 47 minutes between the first shots and his arrival at the medical bay, you need to understand the layout of Candro's station's central concourse. The concourse was roughly ovoid, 500 meters at its longest dimension, 300 at its widest. 3 main floor-level exit corridors, plus the partially obscured eastern maintenance access. 2 upper walkway levels, connected to the main floor by 6 transit lifts and 4 emergency stairwells. The roof, if you could call it that, was a structural grid of interconnected atmospheric ducts, power conduit housings, lighting arrays, and the station's primary internal communications relay cluster. It was not designed for human occupancy. Nothing up there was. It was a maintenance space, accessed by a single service ladder in the northwest corner when it needed to be accessed at all, which was rarely. Sergeant Mace was up there within 4 minutes of the first shot. Security footage shows him on the upper walkway when the attack began. He had apparently been crossing the walkway to reach the lower concourse when the shooting started. He stopped, assessed, and then, instead of retreating or seeking cover on the walkway itself, he went up. Not down, up. Up the emergency stairwell to the second walkway level, and then up the service ladder in the northwest corner into the roof access space. Witness accounts from individuals who were already hiding in the concourse at this point describe what happened next as, and I am quoting here, because the language used across multiple witnesses is remarkably consistent. Something moving in the ceiling. It took the Korath operatives approximately 6 minutes to notice. By that time, Sergeant Mace had already done 2 things. The first thing, he had located the station's internal communications relay cluster, which was physically situated in the ceiling space. Candro's station had been on communications lockdown since the Korath operatives jammed the outgoing signal about 90 seconds into the incident. The jamming equipment was physically present in the concourse. One of the operatives was carrying it. Mace could not reach the jamming equipment from the ceiling. What he could reach was the relay cluster. And what he could do with the relay cluster, and what he apparently knew how to do, which several of the station's own communications technicians later told me, was not information they had expected a foreign military escort to possess, was route around the jamming frequency using the station's emergency broadcast channel, which operated on a separate hardware pathway. He got a signal out. A short one, 14 seconds of transmission, but it was enough station ID, nature of the attack, approximate number of attackers, and the words hostile Korath paramilitary and hegemony standard, clear enough to be understood and acted upon. The second thing he did was more immediately practical. The atmospheric ducts in the ceiling space ran throughout the concourse. They were not large enough for a human to move through in any conventional sense. But the Korath operatives had positioned themselves in specific locations on the concourse floor, and from the ceiling space, if you were willing to do something that most beings would consider structurally unconscionable, those positions were observable and partially accessible. Sergeant Mace, by subsequent account, was willing. Witness account Korath operative designation, subject 12. Captured post-incident. Interviewed under hegemony detention protocols. Transcript reference, WA021. I am going to tell you what I saw because I think you need to understand that we are not stupid. We trained for this. We had done operations like this before. We had protocols for dealing with hegemony garrison forces, for dealing with crowd management, for dealing with the kind of security that a mid-sized commercial station maintains. We did not have protocols for what happened on Candro's. We started hearing sounds from above us about 5 minutes in. Not obvious sounds, subtle ones. Movement in the ceiling space. We identified it, marked it as a potential complication, redirected 2 of our team to watch the ceiling access points. Then the lights in the concourse went out. Not all of them. Specific sections, the sections where our perimeter team was stationed. Someone had cut the power to specific lighting arrays from inside the ceiling, in the dark, without any apparent difficulty. In the sudden darkness, we heard screaming from one of our perimeter positions. Not gunfire, just screaming, and then a crash, and then nothing. We moved to investigate. That was our second mistake. Our first mistake was not clearing the ceiling space immediately, but we didn't have the equipment for it, and we didn't think. We didn't think it was possible for any individual organism to move the way whatever was moving up there was moving. We found Operative Dave on the floor. He was alive. He had a dislocated shoulder and a head wound. He was also tied, wrists behind his back, ankles secured, improvised restraint made from what looked like atmospheric duct material that had been torn and braided into a functional binding. Neat work. Professional work. And we found something else. Dave's weapon was gone. Now there was something in the ceiling with a weapon. I will not pretend, for the purposes of this interview, that we were not frightened. We were, because what we were experiencing was the systematic destruction of our operational control by something we could not see, could not effectively target, and could not predict. We did not know there was a human soldier in that ceiling. We thought, I don't know what we thought. We had heard things about hegemony special forces operating covertly on stations in the outer corridor. We thought it might be something like that. We started pulling our people inward, tightening our perimeter, trying to present a smaller target. We moved the hostages toward the center of the floor. That was when the wall came down. Security footage transcript, Candro Station Central Concourse. Camera array, CC11 CC13. Timestamp, 14:58:22 GST. Transcribed and annotated by Senior Archivist Thessaly Vaughan. CC11, 14:58:22. A portion of the northeastern interior wall, approximately a 3-meter wide section of prefabricated composite paneling, separates from the structural frame and falls into the concourse. The collapse appears to have been facilitated by the removal of 6 specific fastening bolts, which were later found in the ceiling space above the panel. It is not clear how Sergeant Mace identified the correct bolts from above, in the dark, while managing a through-and-through gunshot wound to his left arm. CC11, 14:58:23. The falling panel strikes 2 Korath operatives who were positioned against the northeastern wall. Both are incapacitated. CC13, 14:58:25. In the confusion and dust generated by the wall collapse, Sergeant Mace drops from the ceiling access point in the northwestern corner. He is no longer unarmed. He has 1 Korath standard-issue sidearm. He lands on the concourse floor. The drop is approximately 4 meters and rolls. He comes up moving. CC13, 14:58:27 through 14:59:04. What follows is 37 seconds of engagement. Security footage captures the broad outlines. The details are provided in witness accounts. Witness account, Hegemony Compliance Officer Seth Adren. Transcript reference, WA009. Interview conducted, 11 days post-incident. I was one of the hostages in the center of the floor. I had a head wound from when the crowd surge knocked me into an equipment stall, concussive, not critical, but bad enough that my vision was compromised and I was having trouble staying upright. One of the civilian traders in the crowd had been keeping me conscious, but it was a losing battle. When the wall came down, everything happened fast. I was not in a condition to be an accurate witness to the tactical details of what followed. I can only tell you what I saw from the floor, through compromised vision, while trying not to lose consciousness. I saw a large figure moving through the dust from the wall collapse. Moving fast, moving low, moving in a way that I recognized as combat trained, because even with a head wound there are things the brain holds onto. I saw two Korath operatives go down in quick succession. I heard the sounds but couldn't see the exact details. I saw another operative turn and fire, and I saw the large figure take it. He took it and kept moving. That was the moment I understood we were watching something different. In hegemony military doctrine, a soldier who takes a hit that doesn't incapacitate performs a tactical reassessment. You check the wound. You decide if you can continue. You adjust your operational tempo based on your physical status. There is a rational calculation that takes place. The human soldier did not slow down. There was no calculation visible. He took the hit, and I later learned it was a wound to the same arm that was already wounded, which is, I don't have the medical vocabulary to explain exactly why that's remarkable, so I'll leave it to the doctors in this report, and he did not slow down. He was at the next operative position in under 3 seconds. I am aware that I am describing things in a way that might sound like I am mythologizing. I want to be clear that I am not. I am a military officer. I have 22 years of service. I am describing what I observed with my own eyes, and I am doing so with the understanding that accuracy matters more than drama. The human went through 4 Korath combat operatives in under 40 seconds, injured in a contested environment, with a weapon he had taken off an enemy combatant and therefore wasn't zeroed for his grip or his firing style. He subdued them without lethal force. All 4 survived. He could have killed them. He did not. That was the part I kept thinking about afterward. Not that he could do what he did. That he stopped short of the thing that would have been easier. Part 3. The Scanning. Witness account, Dr. Yavara Souls, Hegemony Medical Institute. Transcript reference, WA007 continued. I need to walk you through the medical bay in detail, because the incident that gives this file its classification rating, the incident that is referenced in every xenobiology curriculum update from the past 2 years, happened in my medical bay, and I was there for every second of it. When Sergeant Mace walked through my door, I was already in the middle of treating 4 other patients. I looked up, assessed his visible injuries in about 3 seconds, the standard triage evaluation that becomes automatic after enough years of practice, and called my colleague Dr. Pel Samara over to take over my current patient so I could deal with the new arrival. Dr. Samara is Vethani. She is an excellent physician. She is also someone who had, at that point, approximately 14 months of professional experience with human physiology, which is about 14 months more than most hegemony physicians have, and which still turned out to be completely insufficient for what followed. The first thing I did was the full-body scanner. Standard protocol for trauma patients. It's faster and more comprehensive than a visual examination. It gives me internal imaging, and it means I can catch things that don't present visually, like internal bleeding or structural damage to organs. I ran the scan. I looked at the results. I said out loud to no one in particular, "This is wrong." Dr. Samara came to look over my shoulder. She stared at the scan results for a moment. Then she said, "Run it again." I ran it again. Same results. Dr. Samara said something in her native Vethani dialect that I will not reproduce here, but which is, I have since been told, a fairly creative oath involving the ancestral moon deities of her home world. Let me tell you what the scanner was showing me. A through-and-through wound to the upper left arm, which we knew about. 2 fractured ribs on the right side, which we knew about. A moderate concussion, which we knew about. A partial burn on the right forearm, which we knew about. 3 additional gunshot wounds. I want to be precise here. Sergeant Mace came into my medical bay with 3 wounds that had not been present in any of the security footage at the beginning of the incident. He had been shot, in the 47-minute interval between the start of the attack and his arrival in my bay, 3 additional times. In the shoulder blade, the projectile had deflected off the scapula and was still partially embedded. In the right thigh, through and through, had missed the femoral artery by approximately 6 millimeters. And in the left side, a grazing wound that had carved a furrow approximately 20 centimeters long and 4 centimeters deep through the muscle tissue above his lowest rib. He had not mentioned any of these. He had not mentioned them because, and I want this to be absolutely clear in the record, he appeared to have simply continued operating after receiving them. And then, when he arrived at my medical bay, his brain had prioritized the information about his arm and his ribs, which he had known about, and the other wounds had simply not come up. When I asked him about the shoulder wound, he reached around, felt it, and said, "Oh. Just oh." Dr. Samara had to leave the bay for a few minutes. I later learned she went to the storage corridor and sat on the floor for a while. I did not begrudge her this. But that is still not the part that made me scream. Witness account: Dr. Pel Samara, Candros Station Medical Bay. Transcript reference: Y011. Interview conducted 9 days post-incident. I need to preface this by saying that I went to medical school for 8 years. I did 4 years of residency in trauma surgery. I have treated everything from mining accidents to combat injuries to exotic environmental exposure cases that took 3 specialists and a consultation with a university xenobiology department to even diagnose. I was not prepared. When Yavara, Dr. Sauls, called me over to look at the scanner results, I saw what she was seeing. 4 gunshot wounds, 2 fractured ribs, a concussion, a burn. The math of what this being had survived was already uncomfortable. Not impossible, but at the outer edge of what I would have predicted for a species of that biological class. Then Yavara ran the deep tissue scan, and we saw the rest of it. Sergeant Mace had a medical history that was physically present in his body. This is something we do not often see in the way that human bodies present it. When I say physically present, I mean that the scanner was showing me in his skeletal structure alone 11 prior fractures at various stages of healing. 2 of them were not fully healed yet. One of them was, according to the imaging, perhaps 8 weeks old. He had been walking around on a partially healed femoral fracture for approximately 2 months. He had apparently just continued. He had surgical scarring in his abdominal cavity consistent with emergency field surgery. He had impact scarring on the frontal lobe of his brain, mild, but present, consistent with repeated concussive trauma events over a period of years. He had been shot before. The scanner showed me 3 previous projectile wound sites that had healed well actually. That part was impressive. The scarring was clean and the tissue remodeling was efficient, but they were there. He had been shot on 3 previous occasions and he had healed and he had continued. Yavara looked at me, I looked at her. Then she ran the cellular repair rate analysis, which is a specialized function of the scanner that we almost never use because it takes about 6 minutes and requires a baseline comparison to the species standard parameters. We had the human standard parameters in the system. They had been added 14 months ago when the human diplomatic contingent started coming through Candros, and at the time, I had reviewed them and thought they were a little remarkable but not extraordinary. The analysis came back. Sergeant Mace's tissue repair rate was running at approximately 140% of standard human baseline. That means, even by human standards, which are already higher than most hegemony species in terms of raw biological repair capacity, this particular individual was healing faster than normal. He had been in combat for 47 minutes. He had been shot 4 times in addition to the other injuries. He had been healing the entire time. His body had been routing resources toward repair, managing blood loss, compensating for structural damage. All of this happening underneath the surface, quietly, while he was apparently disassembling walls and removing Korath operatives from an active combat situation. It was at this point that I had to leave the bay for a few minutes. When I came back, Yavara was in the middle of asking him about the femoral fracture. He was explaining, in a completely matter-of-fact tone, that it had happened during training exercises 8 weeks prior, and that the medical officer at his base had told him it was a minor fracture and cleared him for light duty, and since the diplomatic escort assignment was technically light duty, he had been on it. Yavara asked him if it hurt. He appeared to consider the question with genuine seriousness, which somehow made it worse. Then he said something that I have written down and kept, because I have used it in every xenobiology lecture I have given in the 2 years since this event. He said, "I mean, yeah. But so does everything when you think about it." Medical report, Dr. Yavara Souls. Formal filing, IMCRB reference 7741, A Med 01. Excerpted and annotated by Archivist Thessaly Vorn. The following is an excerpt from Dr. Saul's formal medical report on Sergeant Mace, filed with the Hegemony Medical Institute's Xenobiology Department 14 days post-incident. It has been excerpted for inclusion in this archive document. The full report is available under file reference IMCRB 7741, A Med 01. The patient's physiological presentation represents the most comprehensive single-case documentation of human biological resilience I have encountered in my clinical career. I want to be specific about what I mean by resilience, because this word is often used casually in xenobiological literature in ways that obscure what is actually being observed. When we say that humans are resilient, we typically mean one of 3 things. 1. Their pain tolerance is high relative to comparable species. 2. Their tissue repair capacity is high relative to comparable species. Or 3. Their cognitive function under physical stress remains intact for longer than comparable species. Sergeant Mace's case demonstrated all 3 simultaneously, under real-world conditions, which is rare in the clinical documentation. What I was not prepared for, and what I want to flag as requiring immediate attention in our xenobiological education framework, is the 4th factor that human biology presents in extremis conditions: the apparent absence of a clear biological threshold at which the organism involuntarily ceases functioning due to accumulated trauma. In every other species I have treated in 20 years of practice, there is a threshold. It is different for every species, but it exists. Accumulated trauma reaches a point where the organism cannot continue regardless of conscious determination. The Vethani nervous system, for example, has an automatic regulatory response that produces unconsciousness when systemic trauma exceeds a certain level. This is a protective mechanism. The Sorvian respiratory system has a similar failsafe. Sergeant Mace's scan revealed that he had exceeded what I would have calculated as the functional trauma threshold for a human individual by approximately 30%. He had done so, and then continued to function for an additional 15 minutes before arriving at my medical bay. I cannot fully account for this within existing human physiological models, and I want to flag that our existing models may require significant revision. Part 4. No way, you can't still be alive. Witness account, Dr. Yavara Souls. Transcript reference, WA007 continued. I want to tell you about the moment that is referenced in the title of this file. Because if you are reading this document for that moment, you deserve to have it told accurately, and not just as a dramatic headline. It happened about an hour and 20 minutes after Sergeant Mace arrived in my medical bay. We had been working on him steadily: field extraction of the fragment from his shoulder, debridement of the thigh wound, chest wrapping for the ribs, neural assessment for the concussion, treatment of the burn, suturing on the various lacerations, wound cleaning across all 4 projectile sites. He was conscious for most of it. I will not pretend that this was normal. It was not normal. For the kind of wound inventory we were treating, a patient being conscious and coherent throughout is not common. He asked questions about what we were doing and why, in the manner of someone who is genuinely curious rather than managing his fear. He made small observations. At one point, when I was cleaning the wound on his left arm, he looked at it and said, almost to himself, "I need to stop leading with this arm." Third time. Third time that arm had been shot. I kept my face neutral. I am a professional. Then we ran the final comprehensive scan, the one we do at the end of a trauma treatment session to compare against the initial scan and confirm we haven't missed anything. It is a routine scan. I have run it thousands of times. I ran it. My junior colleague at the time, a young Sorvian named Ressa, who was on her first field posting after medical school, and who I would like to formally apologize to in this document for what she experienced during her rotation on Candros, was monitoring the scanner display. Ressa made a sound. I came to look at the display. The final scan was showing me that the tissue repair around the shoulder wound, the wound we had treated approximately 90 minutes earlier, had already advanced to what I would have expected to see 3 to 4 days post-treatment in a standard human patient. 3 to 4 days, in 90 minutes. Ressa turned to look at me. Her eyes were very wide. She said, "Dr. Sauls, is that correct?" I checked the scanner calibration. I reran the scan. I compared it against the initial scan images. It was correct. And then, I have told this story many times, and I am always slightly embarrassed by it, because I am a senior physician and I pride myself on a certain professional composure, and what I did next was not composure. I said, out loud, in a voice that was louder than I intended, "No way, you cannot still be healing at that rate. You cannot still be doing that." Ressa heard me and looked at the scan again. Then she screamed. It was a short scream. Professional reflex shut it down quickly, but it was undeniably a scream. Sergeant Mace, who was lying on the treatment platform with approximately 14 separate wound sites being managed, heard her scream and turned his head to look at her. His expression was concerned. For her, he was concerned for the person who had just screamed at a scan of him. He said, "Is everything okay?" Ressa said, Your tissue is the rate of." She stopped, reorganized, tried again. "How," she said, very carefully, "how are you doing that?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the scanner display, as if checking what she was looking at. He made a small face, the human expression that communicates mild uncertainty about how to explain something. "I don't know exactly," he said. "I've always healed fast. My mother says all the men in her family do, something about the genetics." Ressa sat down on the floor. Not in distress, she was fine, she was professional. She had simply run out of leg strength momentarily.